Have you ever wondered what happens when the heart of the world's loudest band just stops? For over 40 years, ACDC wasn't just a band. It was a relentless force of nature, a high-voltage freight train powered by two brothers, Angus and Malcolm Young. They were the architects of a sound that became the very definition of rock and roll for generations. But after the devastating loss of his brother Malcolm, and the gut-wrenching departure of his key bandmates, almost everyone believed ACDC was over. The engine had stalled, the thunder had finally faded, but they didn't know the real story. They didn't know about the quiet strength of the one constant, the perpetual schoolboy who simply refused to let the legacy die. This isn't just a story about a band falling apart. It's the story of how one man, armed with his iconic Gibson SG and a promise to his brother, stared down the deafening silence, the crazy rumors, and the crushing weight of heartbreak to keep the thunder alive. This is what really happened to Angus Young, the last man standing. To really get the sheer force of will that kept ACDC going, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Before the stadiums, the millions of records, the legend, there were just the Youngs. The family packed up and moved from the gritty streets of Glasgow, Scotland, to the sunny suburbs of Sydney, Australia in 1963, a decision that would accidentally change music history forever. The Young house was a pressure cooker of musical ambition, mostly thanks to the success of older brother George. As a member of the Easy Beats, George had a taste of international fame, and his success cast a long, inspiring shadow over his younger brothers Malcolm and Angus. George wasn't just a rock star big brother. He was their mentor. He taught them how to build a song, how to find a killer riff, and how to survive the shark-infested waters of the music business. He was their first producer and their biggest fan. But it was Malcolm who had the vision. He was the quiet, stoic leader, the master of rhythm, the real engine of the band. Malcolm wanted a no-frills, loud and brutally effective rock and roll band. Something that would strip away the glam and prog rock fluff of the early 70s and deliver music that was raw, primal and powerful. Angus was the other side of the coin. He was the show, the live wire, the visual chaos of the band's energy. While Malcolm was the rock-solid foundation, Angus was the lightning bolt. His iconic schoolboy uniform, an idea from their sister Margaret, was a stroke of marketing genius. But it was his frantic, duck-walking, sweat-drenched performances that burned the image of ACDC into the minds of rock fans everywhere. Their sister also suggested the name ACDC after seeing the abbreviation for alternating current, direct current on her sewing machine. It was the perfect metaphor for the band's electrifying energy. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable. Malcolm, planted firmly, head nodding to the beat, anchoring the entire sonic assault with his Gretsch guitar. Angus, a blur of motion, a Tasmanian devil of pure energy, wringing every last drop of feedback and fury from his SG. They were a two-headed monster. Malcolm was the strategist, the one who made the tough calls on hiring and firing members and producers. Angus was the showman. But in the studio, they were co-architects of a sound built on Malcolm's unforgettable riffs. When he put on that guitar, he was one big guitar, Angus would later say of his brother. To put it this way, when he played guitar, it sounded like there were two people playing. This bond wasn't just professional, it was family. It was forged in a shared childhood and a singular dream. This bond would become the band's greatest strength, and eventually, its most profound source of pain. After running through a few early members, the band's true identity locked into place in September 1974. On a recommendation from their brother George, Malcolm and Angus found their voice in a fellow Scottish-born, Australian-raised hellraiser named Ronald Bon Scott. Bon wasn't just a singer, he was a phenomenon. With a mischievous grin, a voice that sounded like it was soaked in whiskey and gargled with gravel, and lyrics that were a perfect mix of cheeky jokes and street-tough poetry, he was the ideal frontman for the Young Brothers' high-voltage boogie. With Bon at the helm, ACDC became an unstoppable touring machine. They sharpened their sound in the rough and tumble pubs of Australia, getting a reputation for shows that were loud, dangerous, and an absolute blast. They were a band for the people, their music a soundtrack for blue-collar rebellion and weekend parties. The lineup was solidified with drummer Phil Rudd and bassist Mark Evans, later replaced by Cliff Williams in 1977, creating what many fans call the classic AC/DC formation. Their early albums, High Voltage and Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, captured that raw, live energy. But it was 1977's Let There Be Rock that really announced their arrival on the world stage. It was an album that lived up to its name, a blistering testament to the power of rock and roll, driven by Angus's frantic guitar and Bon's preacher-like delivery. The huge international breakthrough came with 1979's Highway to Hell. Working with producer Robert "Mutt" Lang for the first time, the band polished their sound without losing their bite. The riffs were sharper, the hooks were bigger, and the whole thing was cleaner, making their brand of rock perfect for American radio without ticking off their hardcore fans. The title track became a global anthem for rebellion. After years of non-stop work, they were on the edge of superstardom. They had conquered Australia, they'd made a dent in Europe, and now America was in their sights. The future looked like a wide-open road. But just as they were about to slam the pedal to the floor, tragedy struck, and the highway to hell took on a devastatingly literal meaning. On February 19th, 1980, the rock world woke up to shocking news. Bon Scott, the charismatic, seemingly invincible frontman of AC/DC, was dead at 33. He had passed away in a friend's car after a night of heavy drinking in London. The official cause was acute alcohol poisoning. For the band, the news wasn't just a career disaster. It was like a death in the family. Angus Young said the loss was like losing a member of your family. The days that followed were a blur of grief and confusion. The band that had just hit the top of its game was suddenly without a leader. The music press, the fans, and even people, in their own circle, just assumed this was it. How could it not be? Bon Scott wasn't just their singer. He was the spirit of AC/DC, his swagger, his voice, his lyrics. They were all baked into the band's DNA. Replacing him didn't just seem hard, it seemed wrong, unthinkable. The young brothers retreated into their grief. The weight of what to do next was crushing. For a moment, they seriously considered just calling it quits. The thought of getting on stage without Bon felt like a betrayal. The music they made was so tied to him that continuing felt hollow. Then, in that dark moment, a crucial bit of encouragement came from an unexpected place: Bon Scott's parents. They reached out to the band and told them to keep going, insisting that Bon would have wanted them to. That blessing from the Scott family was a critical turning point. It gave the young brothers the permission they needed to even think about a future for AC/DC. Malcolm, always the practical leader, made the call. He told Angus they had to keep working on the songs they had already started for the next album, if only to keep their minds busy. It was a way to cope, to channel their grief into the one thing they knew how to do: make music. The decision was made. AC/DC would not die with Bon Scott. But this raised a massive question. Who on earth could possibly fill his shoes? The search for a new frontman began, a task that seemed doomed from the start, but would lead to one of the most miraculous comebacks in music history. Finding a new singer was a nightmare. The band auditioned several hopefuls, but nobody felt right. Bon Scott's ghost loomed over everything. Then, a name from the past came up. Years earlier, Bon himself had seen a singer named Brian Johnson performing with his band, Geordie. He was so blown away by Johnson's raw, powerful voice, which included a moment where he was literally screaming on the floor from what turned out to be appendicitis, that he raved about him to Angus. Bon even compared him to his own hero, Little Richard. That was high praise. Remembering Bon's endorsement, the band invited Brian to an audition. At the time, Brian Johnson had pretty much given up on his rock and roll dream and was running a business that fixed vinyl car roofs in Newcastle. When he got the call, he was skeptical, but curious. He went to the audition, and the chemistry was instant. The first song they played was the ACDC classic Whole Lotta Rosie, followed by a blues jam. The band knew. They'd found their guy. Brian's voice was different from Bond's. It was higher, more of a piercing shriek than a gravelly roar, but it had the same raw power and soul. On April 8, 1980, less than 2 months after Bond's death, Brian Johnson was officially the new lead singer of ACDC. With their new frontman locked in, the band and producer Mutt Lange flew to Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas to start the new album. The air was thick with grief, pressure, and a ton of determination. They weren't just making a follow-up to their biggest album. They were making a tribute to their fallen friend. Brian Johnson faced the insane pressure of not only joining one of the world's biggest bands, but also writing lyrics for an album that would serve as a memorial to the man he was replacing. The process was healing. The band poured all their sorrow and defiance into the music. After the monster success of Back in Black, ACDC faced a new challenge. How do you follow up a perfect album? Their next record, 1981's For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, met that challenge head-on. It became their first album to hit #1 in the US, and its title track, with its explosive cannon-firing finale, became a signature part of their live shows. They were, without a doubt, the biggest rock band on the planet, but the road through the 1980s wasn't always smooth. In 1983, after things got tense and even physical with Malcolm, longtime drummer Phil Rudd was fired. He was replaced by Simon Wright, and later Chris Slade, as the band navigated the 80s, a decade full of synth pop and glam metal. While their sales went up and down, their sound never changed. They were an island of pure rock in a sea of changing trends. Through it all, Angus Young was the constant. He was the visual anchor, the schoolboy who never stopped moving, the face of ACDC. While other bands changed their look and their sound, Angus and his SG were a reliable beacon of high voltage rock. The release of 1990's The Razor's Edge marked a huge comeback. Driven by the iconic riff of Thunderstruck, the album was a massive commercial hit, introducing the band to a whole new generation and proving they were here to stay. The lineup stabilized again in 1994 when Phil Rudd returned, kicking off 2 decades of consistency. They kept putting out solid albums like Ball Breaker and Stiff Upper Lip, and their tours were always among the highest grossing in the world. Their 2008 album, Black Ice, debuted at #1 in 29 countries, proving their incredible staying power. But during the recording and the massive world tour for that album, a shadow began to creep in. Angus noticed his brother, his lifelong musical partner, was struggling. Malcolm, the band's foundation, was starting to show the first signs of a cruel illness, one that would test Angus's strength in ways he could never have imagined. The years after the Black Ice tour kicked off the toughest era in ACDC's history, a series of relentless blows that would have destroyed any other band. The first, and most devastating, was Malcolm Young's declining health. What started as small memory lapses during the Black Ice sessions had turned into a full-blown battle with dementia. For the tour that followed, Malcolm had to relearn the very songs he had written. Angus had to watch his brother, the band's leader and visionary, fight to hold on. The decision for him to officially step away from the band in April 2014 wasn't just a lineup change. It was an earthquake at the very heart of ACDC. Malcolm's nephew, Stevie Young, stepped in to fill the impossibly large shoes of the rhythm guitarist. With heavy hearts, the band pushed forward to record the 2014 album, Rock or Bust. But the hits kept coming. The second blow landed when drummer Phil Rudd got into serious legal trouble in New Zealand. The charges, which included threatening to kill and drug possession, made it impossible for him to go on the next tour. Chris Slade, who had played with the band in the early 90s, was brought back to take over the drums. The Rock or Bust tour launched in 2015, but just as they were finding their groove, the third blow struck. In March 2016, Brian Johnson's doctors gave him a terrifying ultimatum: stop touring immediately or go completely deaf. The news shocked fans. The man who had miraculously saved the band 36 years earlier was now forced out. Johnson later explained, "It wasn't just years of loud stages, but a specific incident where he forgot to wear earplugs while racing cars, which burst his eardrum. The band had to postpone the rest of the tour, their future once again in chaos." Then came the fourth blow. In July 2016, bassist Cliff Williams, the quiet, steady anchor of the band since 1977, announced he was retiring. He said that after losing Malcolm, and with the situations with Phil and Brian, the band had become a changed animal. The constant turmoil had worn him down, and he felt it was time to step away. Suddenly, Angus Young was standing alone. Of the classic lineup that had conquered the world, he was the only one left. Malcolm was gone, fighting a cruel disease. Phil was sidelined by his legal battles. Brian was silenced by his health. Cliff had decided to hang it up. The rock and roll juggernaut had been taken apart, piece by piece. To the outside world, this was it. The rumors flew, and everyone agreed ACDC was finally truly over. In mid-2016, Angus Young was stuck. He was contractually obligated to finish the Rock or Bust tour, but his band was in shambles. Cancelling the dates would have been the easy out, the logical end to a tragic story. But Angus felt a duty to the fans, to the crew, and most of all, to the legacy he and his brother had built. He remembered Malcolm's fighting spirit, how his brother would always say, "We'll just go in and do some work. We'll sit and write some songs." Angus felt he had to keep that spirit alive. In a move that completely stunned the music world, Angus announced the tour would go on with a guest vocalist, Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. The decision was met with a firestorm of controversy. To many fans, it was blasphemy. To others, it was a fascinating, if weird, solution. Axl, a famously unpredictable character, was also a massive ACDC fan who worshipped Bon Scott. He actually called the band to offer his help, and after a rehearsal where he blew Angus away with his professionalism and vocal chops, he got the gig. Axl Rose, who had recently broken his foot and had to perform from a throne, fronted ACDC for the final 22 shows. And he did it with a surprising amount of respect and passion, helping Angus fulfill his promise to finish what they'd started. But even as he kept going, the weight of the world was on Angus's shoulders. In interviews from that time, you could hear his uncertainty. When asked what would happen after the tour, he'd just say, "At this point, I don't know." The final, most heartbreaking blow came on November 18, 2017. Malcolm Young, the band's founder, visionary, and soul, passed away at the age of 64 from the effects of dementia. Even though he hadn't been in the band for years, his death was a profound, final loss. Angus released a statement calling his brother's legacy enormous, and one that would live on forever. In his grief, Angus was now the sole guardian of that legacy. He had lost his best friend, the other half of the creative force that had driven ACDC for over 40 years. The silence left by Malcolm's death was deafening. The question wasn't if ACDC could continue anymore, but if it should. Before we reveal how Angus Young pulled the band back from the absolute brink, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You don't want to miss more stories about rock's greatest legends. In the years after the chaotic Rock or Bust tour and Malcolm's death, the ACDC camp went silent. And that silence seemed to confirm what everyone already thought. The band was done. But behind the scenes, a quiet resurrection was taking place. Angus Young had a secret, and it was rooted in the very bond that had started it all. Before Malcolm's health got too bad, he and Angus had written and recorded a stockpile of new song ideas and riffs, many from around the Black Ice sessions. Malcolm had told Angus, "We'll leave these songs for now. We'll get them on the next one." That promise echoed in Angus's head. He knew he had to finish those tracks. It felt like a duty to his brother. So he started making calls. He reached out to Brian Johnson, whose career seemed over. Brian had been working with a specialist on a new experimental in-ear technology that, miraculously, allowed him to hear the band's music clearly without damaging his hearing further. The treatment worked. Brian was back. Cliff Williams, who had retired to a quiet life of fishing, was coaxed back for the project by the idea of honoring Malcolm. The thought of the old band getting back together was too exciting to pass up, and Phil Rudd, having sorted out his legal issues, was also welcomed back. The reunion was kept so secret that even their longtime engineer, Mike Fraser, didn't know. The full lineup was back until he showed up at the studio in Vancouver. The sessions were, by all accounts, electric. As Brian Johnson put it, as soon as we walked in, there was this electricity, this bond that had been built up over 38 years. The resulting album, released in November 2020, was titled Power Up. It was, in Angus's own words, a tribute to Malcolm, just as Back in Black had been a tribute to Bon. Malcolm is credited as a co-writer on every single one of the album's 12 tracks. Even the title, Power Up, was a nod to Malcolm's incredible energy. Brian Johnson said he could still feel Malcolm in the studio, that the band was his idea, and that everything still ran through him. The album was a huge success, debuting at #1 in 21 countries. It was pure, unmistakable ACDC, loud, defiant, and packed with the swaggering rock and roll that made them legends. It was more than a new album. It was a statement. Angus Young, against all odds, had put the broken pieces of his band back together and fulfilled the promise he made to his brother. He had proved that even after unimaginable loss, the spirit of ACDC was unbreakable. The story of Angus Young is one of unbelievable resilience. It's about a man who has stared down the death of his band not once, but twice, after losing a key member and simply refused to let it go. First with Bon Scott, and then through the slow, heartbreaking unraveling that cost him his brother and his bandmates, Angus has been the unwavering guardian of the ACDC flame. Today, that flame is burning as brightly as ever. In 2025, ACDC is once again a global powerhouse, selling out stadiums across Europe and North America on their